All right, so to get ourselves started here, what I want to do first is actually discuss in a lot of detail what this app is going to look like, right? This will kind of give us a starting point for all of the different functionality that we're going to add, and it'll give me an opportunity to kind of lay out how everything is going to fit together ahead of time. All right, so as I said, we're going to be building a note sharing app. And what this app is going to allow users to do is basically create notes, modify their content, which we're going to allow them to write in Markdown too, by the way. We'll take a look at that in more detail later on. And we're going to allow them to share those notes with other people, right? Other users of the application in a similar way to how you're allowed to share documents on a platform like Google Docs. All right? So real quick, what I want to do is just draw out a little bit what this app is going to look like and how it's going to work, and we'll discuss how all of the different technologies are going to fit together. All right, now probably the most obvious pages that our application is going to contain are the login page and the create account page. And these actually aren't pages that we're going to create first, for the primary reason that we're not going to actually add user authentication to our application until later on. All right, so we're going to have our login page, which is, of course, just going to allow the user to log in with their email and password. And we're going to have a sign up page or a create account page. We'll decide which one we want to call it later on. And that, of course, is going to have the usual fields that we've seen. All right, so these pages are going to be the sort of entry point for our application for a little while, right? Once we actually add these pages, that is. So let's talk about the more app-specific pages in our application now. The main page that users are going to go to once they've logged in, or, before we've actually created the login and sign up pages, the main page is going to be the note list page. This is just going to contain a list of all of the notes that a user has created, right? So it'll say something like my notes. And it'll have a list of all of those here, right? So it'll have blah, blah, blah. Blah, 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 blah. And also, and this is something we're not going to add until a little bit later, but this page is also going to have a shared with me section that will list all of the notes that other users have shared with this user. Okay, so that'll just have a list of those notes that the user will be able to view. So that's the main page, and we'll call this something like the notes list page when we get there. And the way this is going to work is whenever the user clicks on one of these notes, that note is going to take them to the note detail page. Now, this is where the user will be able to edit the note. And essentially what it's going to look like when the user first goes to this page, it's just going to have the note title, right? So it'll say my note. And then it will have the note content, which, as I said, is going to be rendered Markdown. Now, I'm not going to go into Markdown in too much detail here, but suffice to say that Markdown is an easy way for non-technical people to write styled text, right? So, you and I both know that having an H1 element like this will display hi in very large text, right? That's a heading 1 element. And we also know that if you display something inside, let's say a paragraph tag, then that will just display it in normal text. Right, but in general, when non-technical people are managing content, right, let's say that your company has some people that are managing your blog content for your company's website, you're not going to want to make them use these HTML elements because, in my experience, chances are they'll just do it wrong and you'll end up having to fix it. And also, most of the time they don't like doing it anyway. So what Markdown is just a simplified way of expressing the same things that HTML tags express, but an easier, more non-technical, folk-friendly way. So what this would look like here, if you want to express an H1 heading, in Markdown that would just be this little hash symbol followed by a space, and then you would have the text, right? So Markdown, anyway, is just an incredibly useful way to allow people to edit content and style it differently without them having to learn HTML and that kind of thing. So anyway, that's what the content of this page is going to be. It's going to be rendered Markdown. Now, we'll see how to do that later on. But the other thing on this page is going to be an edit button, which will allow the user to edit the content and the title of this note. Now, what this is going to do, it's going to change these two things here into text inputs, basically. All right, so this will we'll use a state variable or something like this. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it. And basically that will just contain It'll be a text input that contains the current title. The user will be able to edit that. We'll have a big text area kind of thing here with all of the content in unrendered markdown, right, that the user can actually edit like this. And this will have a save button, which will allow the user to save those changes, and probably also a cancel button, which will allow them to cancel whatever they were doing. All right, now this is the main stuff that we're going to be building first, right? Before we get into creating user accounts, before we add the login and sign up page, before we even add the backend, we're going to build out these pages. Now, just a few extra things we're going to add to these pages, just so that you'll know why I'm doing these things when I actually add components for them. We're going to want to allow users to create new notes on this page, and to do that, we'll have a button that will look something like this. And when the user clicks that button, what that's going to do is it'll show a modal of some sort that will ask them what they want the name of that note to be, right? The title of that note. So it'll look something like this. It might say create new note or something like that at the top. And it'll have a button that will allow them to create a new note with whatever name they've entered into this text input. And once they've done that, the modal will go away and the new note should appear in that list there. Okay, now another thing that we're going to allow users to do is have a delete button on each of these notes that will let the user delete that note. So what that's going to do, if the user clicks on it, it's going to show a modal asking them if they're sure they want to delete it. Right, so that'll be something like this. Are you sure? Okay, and that'll give them the options yes and no. And according to which one they pick, it will either delete the note or it will just leave it be. All right, so as I said, this stuff that I just drew out here is going to be the main stuff that we'll be implementing in the first part of this, right? Before we get to adding a backend, before we get to adding a database, before we add user authentication, etc. So that's what we're going to be looking at here today. And just to give you an idea of where we're going to be going with all of this stuff later on, we're eventually going to allow users to share their notes with each other. So essentially what that's going to end up looking like. And I'll go into more detail on this when we get there later on. But this is going to have some sort of like share button, and that will open up a completely different page that will allow the user to share that note with other people by email, right? So, it'll look something like this. It'll have a text input where they can enter in a user's email, and it will share that note with whoever else they've entered. Okay, we'll get to all of that when we get there. There's a lot of details involved in that, obviously, that you'll forget about if I mention them now. So for now, let's just focus on building the basic structure of our application and the core functionality of creating notes, editing notes, and deleting notes. All right, so to get started here, we're going to generate a new React application using create React app. So let's open up our terminal here. I'm going to change directories into where I keep all of my React projects. And inside there, I'm going to say npx create React app. And we'll call this application notes app. All right, so we'll create that. That's going to run for a second or two here. And once that script finishes running, what we're going to do is open this up in our IDE. I'm going to open that up in VS Code by typing code dot. Oops, I need to actually change directories into that application first, and then say code dot. You can always just open yours by saying file open or by using Control O or whatever the equivalent on your operating system is. All right, so now that we've opened this up, there's just a few pieces of cleanup that I want to do first to make sure that our app is ready for us to start adding pages to it. The first thing we're going to do is go into our application and delete all of the boilerplate code that Create React App gives us inside our app component. So I'm just going to delete all of this here, including the div with the class name of app. And in its place, I'm just going to put code goes here. We'll be coming back to replace that later on. I just wanted to clean that up first. We're also going to delete this logo thing here that we were importing, and I'm going to delete the logo file itself from our directory. So we'll delete that. And one more thing, just for consistency's sake, is we're going to actually change this app component to a named export, since that's generally how I like to export all of my components in React. So let's say const app equals, and we'll say export const app like that. Okay, and then we can delete the default export, which means that in our index.js file where we're importing this app component, we need to say import and add the curly braces around it because it's now a named export. And while we're at it, why don't we just remove some of these annoying comments? We'll go into our index.css and delete all of the default styles that they gave us, since we'll be replacing those anyway with our own. And that's pretty much all the cleanup that we're going to do for now. Our app should be ready now for us to start adding things to it. So I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.